Welcome. It's wonderful to see you all here. Please continue with your meals gently, if you like. I'm Neil Lane. I'm a senior fellow here at the Baker Institute for Public Policy. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to Rice University and the Baker Institute for our Civic Scientists lecture. Our distinguished lecturer today is David Laude, who will be introduced in a moment. This lecture this afternoon is a very important part of our larger civic scientist program, which highlights outstanding scientists and engineers, technical professionals of all kinds, who, in addition to making significant contributions in their own field, also devote a portion of their careers to public service, serving in university or government administration, communicating with the public, working in government at various levels, or working with schools, and in many other ways, getting out where most of the American people are and connecting science and technology with all of our neighbors and friends. Try to bridge the gap that still exists, unfortunately, between science and rational public policy making. It's kind of hard to use those words, rational public policy making, but let's keep it in mind. There's always hope for the future. We're endeavoring to spread the word, is the way I would say it, about the vital link between science and the public good through both this lecture and also our outreach program, which over 4 years has taken dozens of scientists and engineers to local, middle, and high schools, reaching more than 4,700 students to date. The Civic Scientist program would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. The program has received enthusiastic support from Rice's George R. Brown School of Engineering, the White School of Natural Sciences, and both of which organizations are co-organizers for today's event. In addition, I want to give special thanks to Ben and Winifred Cheng with us today for their considerable support of the program, and Shell Oil Company for supporting this lecture series as a part of the Baker Institute Shell Distinguished Lecture Series. Our discussion today will focus on efforts needed to create a university culture that assures success for all students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, an acronym that we call STEM. With, I would say, the nation's future in jeopardy of losing its innovative edge, this nation needs a college system that produces large numbers of skilled scientists, engineers, other technical professionals, and they need to be the best in the world. To introduce our speaker today is Dr. Larry Faulkner, strong supporter of the Baker Institute Science and Technology program. Leaders like Larry Faulkner need no introduction, but he'll get a short one anyway. Dr. Faulkner is President Emeritus, as you all know, of the University of Texas at Austin. I meant to say the University of Texas at Austin. I think I got that correct. Under Dr. Faulkner's leadership, UT Austin established a widespread network of services benefiting the K-12 community in Texas and beyond. And among many other achievements, he led the university in setting new records for the retention and graduation of its students. Prior to coming to Texas, Faulkner held chemistry faculty positions at the University of Illinois and Harvard University. After his years at UT Austin, Dr. Faulkner served as president of the Houston Endowment from 2006 to 2012, where he supported many very worthy causes, including Rice University, community, and other organizations. In particular, supported the improvement of math skills for high school and community college students, a very important contribution to our community and the larger nation. Larry continues to give generously of his time and expertise in leading important national efforts to help ensure that the United States remains strong in science and technology and in education. We're delighted he can be here with us today, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Larry Faulkner.
Thank you, Neil, for an excessive introduction. It's a real privilege to be here today. I'm delighted to see this crowd here to hear about the work that David Laude has carried out and fostered at the University of Texas at Austin. And it's my honor to introduce our civic scientist speaker. David Laude is the Senior Vice Provost and a Professor of Chemistry at the University of Texas at Austin. He's been a long-term faculty member of UT's College of Natural Sciences and has won numerous teaching awards. He's a brilliant teacher, actually, and is a member at UT Austin of the Academy of Distinguished Teachers, which is a very high distinction. David has been innovative as a teacher for a long time. He tells an absolutely wonderful story about taking extraordinary steps to get students to actually come to class on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving by serving his freshman chemistry classes of 350 students a complete turkey dinner, which he has cooked himself. I don't know how many turkeys it takes to feed 350 hungry college students, but it's quite a story, and in fact, it's one that has some extraordinarily humorous add-ons. I won't go into all that. David has been an integral figure in transforming undergraduate education at UT Austin. He's launched an extensive list of programs that include the UTeach Teacher Preparation Program, Freshman Research Initiative for Early College Experiential Learning, the Texas Interdisciplinary Plan to assist students with adversity indicators, and the University Leadership Network, a financial aid program that integrates at-risk students into campus culture. And David has been an Associate Dean of Natural Sciences. He was Interim Dean of Natural Sciences. He's now Senior Vice Provost. Prior to coming to UT Austin, he received a PhD from the University of California, Riverside in 1984, a Master's in Science from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University in 1981. I had the pleasure to work with Dr. Laude over a long period of time, close to 20 years now, and can speak to his wisdom, zealous spirit, and his spirit of innovation. Today, he'll share with us the methods he has implemented at UT Austin to achieve historic highs in STEM student persistence and graduation rate. He will give his presentation and then join me afterwards on stage for a Q&A session with the audience. So save your questions for the end. David Laude.
I was hired into the provost office to improve four-year graduation rates at the University of Texas at Austin. They made me the champion of four-year graduation rates. And that meant that I had a specific job that they were asking me to do. There was even a number associated with it. That was good to see because I'm a scientist. I deal very much in critical thinking and quantitative reasoning. I actually ran a large mass spectrometry program for many years at UT Austin, and what I spent most of my time doing was optimizing. The systems I was optimizing were systems where ions went around in circles in strong magnetic fields, but the ideas that were resident there to get the best results I could, the highest signals, the best resolution for the least amount of money and time, were the sorts of things that I was comfortable with as I showed up in the provost office. I showed up at a time when there was actually some politics involved in caring about whether students graduated in 4 years. You may be familiar with the fact that the president of the university Bill Powers had found himself at odds with, well, pretty much everyone. His governor, the legislature, the regents, and they were looking for things to be concerned about on the campus. And one of the things that had bubbled up to the surface, not just on campus, but across the university, across the United States, was a question about higher education and whether it made sense. After the economic downturn in 2007, there were real questions about how much money you should spend to spend your time in college and what the value that would come out of that experience should look like. That was particularly a concern for students who, in fact, did not have the resources to be able to pay for college and instead found themselves, in many cases, going substantially into debt in exchange for whatever institutions were providing. If you started to dig in and take a look at something as simple as graduation in 4 years, which you would expect is what happens on a college campus, the numbers are pretty grim. I don't mean to pick on any particular college, and in fact, nothing that I say here today is meant in any way to suggest that there are easy answers for why it is that things happened the way they did, and we should point and blame various individuals for what turned out. But you know, if you take a look at four-year graduation rates, you see that the small privates and some of the Ivies are able to get something approximating 90% four-year graduation rates. The large public research universities that we typically identify as the best, UVA, Michigan, North Carolina, Berkeley, they clock in about 70% four-year graduation rates. There are an awful lot of large public universities that come in significantly behind that, at around 50%. UT Austin is one of them. Now, let's move from there and look at four-year graduation rates at other four-year institutions. Just looking here in the state of Texas, you would find that more than half of our four-year schools have something less than 20% four-year graduation rates. And it's not that people take a look at that all that often, but when they do, they have to stop and ask themselves, wait a second, those are not very good numbers, and what are the reasons behind that? Well, that's not a problem for me to solve right now, and I can tell you that if I wasn't at UT Austin, I was at one of those schools, I would be confronting my own collection of issues that I would have to deal with in improving four-year graduation rates. And really the question comes down in the end to whether I'm somewhere where they're starting at 18 and I'm trying to get them to 32, or I'm starting at 50 and I'm trying to get them to 70. This really is something that the nation is pointing to and asking about, is are we doing everything we can to get affordability to a place where we can justify the fact that 4 years later you actually have something that you can put in your pocket, your degree, and go out into the workforce. If we can't do that, then we have to question what the point of higher education really is for so many of the students that we entice to become a part of it. Well, that was actually my number I had to hit. I was hired. At the time, the four-year graduation rates at UT were 50%, and I was told that starting with the next class, the next entering class, we had to get to 70%. That's kind of ridiculous, actually, if you think about it, but it seemed like a decent challenge. So the first half of my presentation today will be about that journey to get to 70% from 50% effectively overnight, and the progress we've made up till now, and the hope we have that in a year and a half from now, we will actually have achieved that goal. There is a smaller talk sitting in the middle of this that I aim at faculty, and it has to do with the subset of thinking about graduating students in 4 years that we don't really like to talk about, but it's this simple truth that you can create the greatest community on campus for students in the world and make them feel as at home as you can possibly imagine, and provide all the financial resource for them that they would ever need. But if they flunk a course, they're not going to graduate. And in fact, there's a long tradition in STEM that students will not pass courses in large numbers. Whether it's the integrity of the disciplines, whether it is the quality of the students, the caliber of the instructors, whatever the reason, the notion of a weed-out course, the notion that half the students taking an introductory chemistry or calculus course won't pass it, is something that has been around for a long time. And it doesn't take a lot of math to realize that if I'm here trying to get from 50% four-year graduation rates to 70% four-year graduation rates, and 3/4 of my students are STEM, and the non-passing rates in those introductory courses are 25 to 50%, that I'm never going to get there. So buried in the middle of this talk is a timeout in which I talk about what it has been like for me teaching a 500 student section chemistry course, and having been one of those people who for years showed up, rolled the ball out, gave some lectures, gave some tests, didn't pass 1/4 of my students, and didn't give a thought to it, because that's just how it was done. Now that I'm responsible for graduating students, I suddenly have to look in the mirror and ask myself whether or not I'm doing my part to make sure that happens. And then to think about ways in which we might imagine encouraging faculty to reconsider their responsibilities in working with students. So that's what the presentation is going to be about today. Some of it indulges what I'm doing on a UT campus, what I'm doing in a chemistry classroom, but I hope that you can see some larger sorts of ideas that come out of it. Let me tell you, first and foremost, I am a chemist. I am not a researcher in education, educational psychology, higher education. I've never published there. I've barely read there. Everything that I'm going to show you is a consequence, I like to joke about this, that my father was an Italian Catholic immigrant who made me go to Mass on Sunday and yelled at me the rest of the week, and that's pretty much where everything I know came from. So here's the presentation. So this is a reconsidered institutional message, one in which we talk about every student graduating. Why every student? Because if I don't think about it that way, then I'm not really thinking about optimizing. There's this general attitude about the way we deal with student populations, something like this. Well, 50% of the students graduated in 4 years, and of the others, about half of them had academic issues, and the other half had non-academic issues. What are you supposed to do about it? So if you adopt that attitude, then you pretty much accept what's going on and really don't know that there's that much you can do to fix it. But if, on the other hand, you drill in and you have this expectation that every lost student has a reason, and there ought to be a reason for fixing it, then you adopt a different mindset. I have this thing I want to do at UT Austin. They won't let me do it yet. I want to paint the flagpole out front burnt orange. And I want to put little markers on it every 1,000 students or so. Because for the class of 2017, where I'm supposed to achieve 70% four-year graduation rates, that's about 7,200 students. I can lose 2,200 students and win. I mean, that may sound awful on a certain level, but when you get down to the numbers, that's what 5,000 over 7,200 is. So what I want to do is paint the thing burnt orange and then hire somebody with a little razor blade who goes out every morning and flicks the paint off every time we lose a student. Because then I'll know we lost one. We lost another one. You can get all scriptural if you'd like and think about lost sheep and that ability to bring them back. But if you don't adopt that attitude, then I don't know how you're going to be successful. So that's really a lot of what goes on here. So this is about four-year graduation rate improvements. And there is where we were when I started. Here's where we were this fall. We've done pretty well. And it is not with the class of students that I'm responsible for, but we've had a culture effect across campus. When you ask why don't students at UT Austin graduate at 70% like they do at North Carolina or Berkeley or Michigan, a lot of it comes down to the culture of the campus. It's just not what we do there. If you ask the faculty, most of them think being on a college campus is pretty great. They've been doing it their whole lives. Why not students? Or from the student perspective, what's wrong with the second major at an institution where tuition is only $10,000 a year? And I say only because that's still a pretty darn good deal. Or where staying for a fifth year lets you watch the football team play another season. So that was the mentality. That's what exists on campus. And that's what has to be fought. So in many ways, as I take on this endeavor, It's about what we do for our students to help them be successful, but also it's about changing the way people think about their responsibilities in interacting with the students, the advisors, the faculty, the students themselves, that kind of messaging about getting yourself out in 4 years. And it's really something to think about, the idea that you transition from the way you graduate students at 50% to literally 70%. Boy, the changes that are taking place inside there in terms of enrollment flows are something else. And so we're watching this happen right before our eyes. So we've done pretty well. We got up to our all-time high 58% four-year graduation rates for the university. The College of Natural Sciences just passed 50% four-year graduation rates for the first time in history. They were at 25% when I arrived. Under Dr. Faulkner's leadership, you started to see lots and lots of changes take place. Jim Vick, the Vice President for Student Affairs, started to create communities on campus. What we did in the college to create community was starting to work. I'll tell you about some programs that just really helped with students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. And now we're, instead of being 1 out of 4, we're up to 1 out of 2, which is a pretty impressive thing to do in a rigorous program like that. Engineering isn't far behind. They were down around 25%. They're up to 47% four-year graduation rates. And each of those 2 colleges is shooting to be at 70% in 2 years. So looking at the class of 2017 and the progress, just a couple of numbers here. And again, these are UT Austin numbers. They're valid only for us. They're not valid for anybody else. But they are all-time highs. 19 out of 20 of our students persist into the second year. And that's actually a pretty impressive thing because 75% of our incoming Texas residents get in whether we want them to or not. I don't say that to be bad. I mean, it's just how it is. If you graduate in the top 7 or 8% of your class, then you're going to UT if you want to. And that's just that. That creates a very interesting environment to play with because not only does it mean that we have all-time highs for students with 1,500 plus 2-score SATs, you know, Rice-like numbers, but we also have an amazing number of students with under 1,000 for their combined SAT. So that we have this, it's not exactly a flat distribution of SATs, but it looks pretty close to it. And interestingly, when you put them into a college classroom, it's how you end up creating flat GPAs. You have tons of A's, you have a lot of students who do not pass, and you have very few C's. I actually started to see that. I started to see that inverse curve about 15 years ago. Lots of students didn't pass, and then tons of students got A's and B's. And in fact, it was watching that curve that got me started in this area. I want to point to a particular number on here that's the most impressive thing for me. Look at that average GPA. It's a 3.3. Just a few years ago, it was 2.7. And look at that number there, 1% of students in their freshman class not passing a course. Remember, I was talking about 25 and 50% non-passing rates just a few years ago. These numbers here reflect a transformation among our faculty teaching in STEM, the faculty teaching in chemistry, biology, statistics, calculus, who have dropped their non-passing rates by factors of 2, 3, 5. It's just an amazing thing to see, and I'll talk a bit about how that's happened. But if that hadn't happened, the numbers I'm going to be talking about today would not have happened as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is the obvious thing. It's the idea of building community on campus. Social media is a pretty amazing thing, by the way. I don't personally do it, but I hear that it's great. And students use it constantly to engage each other. And it doesn't prompt them to engage each other not connected, but rather together. So they sit there and they get onto those devices they have and say, let's all meet together organically on the 5th floor of the library. And suddenly there's 100 students showing up on the 5th floor of the library to study chemistry, where they used to just sit in their rooms. The entire campus is alive with this feel of students who are just around each other building community. And in fact, it's in that environment that we can look to the students to help us with those students who historically have not believed that the campus was a place that was very welcoming to them. Toward that end, every incoming student at UT Austin now sits once a week in a room with 20 peers, whether it's because they love history or because they're in an honors program or they're doing some research, and they talk about the things that are real to them about being successful as college students. This is the 360 Connections community. It was called that because at the time we had 7,200 students, and I love that 2 pi radians thing. It has since gone on to be substantially larger than that. There are about 500 small communities that grow every fall, and the students participate in them. And when a student begins to fall through the crack, there's somebody there to recognize and pick them up. There's this idea of building through technology, the way we teach, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on that in just a few minutes. I can tell you that it is one of the primary drivers for why it is that faculty on our campus have started to see other ways to help students be successful. It's very difficult if I stand in front of you and I talk at you for about 75 minutes and hope you will remember every word I say, and then about 3 weeks later ask you what I said, and you get it wrong, and I get you a C, and that's the end of that. I mean, that's how teaching used to happen before all knowledge was sitting on computers. Now that all knowledge sits on the internet, we can exploit that fact and create a variety of different teaching modalities for our students in these flipped or hybrid course environments. I'm currently teaching one with a colleague, Dave Vandenbout, in the chemistry department. We teach combined 2,000 students now. I teach 1,000 students in the afternoon. He teaches 1,000 students in the morning. They have a flipped classroom experience. Everything is sitting online. I've actually dumped all of my videos up onto the web, and they can watch them 24/7 if that's what they feel like. They combine it with adaptive interactive learning tools, with social media and opportunities to work within it. It's just remarkable. We actually provided the faculty of the campus the opportunity to do their own versions of innovation. Course transformation grants that were received by chemistry, biology, statistics, psychology, chemistry faculty. We gave them money, and all we said to them was this: make a better course. Now, at the time, we didn't tell them what better course meant, but they sure heard the president of the university talking about student success and four-year graduation rates, so they probably got the message that a better course was a course in which students were more successful. But we didn't tell them what to do. We just stepped back and said, take a year and do it, and they did it. Most of them did it through hybrid coursework. And on the other side of it, and this isn't exaggerated at all, every one of those disciplines, statistics, chemistry, biology, calculus, saw their non-passing rates cut in half, from 30% to 15%, from 20% to 10%. And you ask yourself why? And I think it's because we had provided the faculty with an environment in which to experiment without being told what to do, and which to feel good about themselves for being successful. So maybe in some ways they were just nicer to the students when it was over. Or maybe in some ways it was that they felt that they were freed from the constraints of just talking at people. But whatever it was, those non-passing rates just dropped and dropped. In chemistry last fall, a place where historically we have had 30% non-passing rates for freshmen, we had a 6% non-passing rate. So it was no longer just me passing my students, it's all of the introductory chemistry faculty doing it. And that's been a remarkable thing, and I attribute it very much to this engagement with technology. When a student shows up on a college campus, you can certainly decide that the good thing about them is that they can bubble in B when the answer is B. Some people are very good at that. Actually, students at UT are generally very good at it. That's how they got in there, or at least relative to their peer group. But you get the distinct impression that's not necessarily the best way to go about teaching. And in fact, there's a reconsideration of what a college experience is supposed to be like. I did a lot of work with Dean Marianne Rankin during her decade and a half as dean, creating programs in which experience became what a student was a part of. I know some of the folks here at the Baker Institute wanted me to talk briefly about the You Teach outreach program. Just briefly, an experience I had, I was a fourth-year professor at UT, and this is the power of what it is to be a professor and having the ability to do whatever you want. I was teaching my sons after-school science, because that's like the law among science faculty. You must teach after-school science for an hour. I did it on a Friday afternoon and then thought, why am I just doing it for my kids? I paid one of my graduate students $100 to go find me an elementary school where I could teach it in the afternoons in an underserved environment. And he found Becker Elementary, and I went there and started teaching it on Friday afternoons instead. And then I thought, why don't I get college students to do this so that we can sort of amplify the effort? In the first year I I found 4 students to do it, and I gave them the only thing they wanted, which was college credit, in exchange for this thing called research. Because it was research. What they were doing was they were told to come up with the ability to teach science to 4th graders or 5th graders using Walmart products. We didn't have any money for it, but it grew from being 4 students to 12 students to 20 students to 50 students to 200 students to 700 students. We were in pretty much every elementary school classroom in the city of Austin, and neither AISD nor my dean knew about it at the time. Once they found out about it, boy, were we breaking a lot of laws. But it was great for them to do that. It turns out this is service learning, and it turns out students absolutely love it. And when students graduate from the university and you ask them, what's the best thing that happened to you while you were at the university? If they were in the You Teach outreach program, they said, oh, that time I spent teaching 5th graders. Do you know what it's like to teach at Becker Elementary School at 10 o'clock in the morning and then go over the hill to Barton Hills, which is on the country club side of things, and teach the same age group an hour later? To be able to see the disparities that exist in education in this country within a mile of each other. I mean, that's priceless in terms of the experience you had, and that ought to be getting college credit. Mary Miller now runs that program and does a magnificent job following all the laws, and we have several hundred students a year who participate. But we created things like the Freshman Research Initiative, the You Teach program. These are programs in which students are immersed right from the moment they arrive on campus in experiences, whether they're teaching experiences or research experiences. We have 1,000 students a year who do the Freshman Research Initiative, a 3-semester program in which they're actually paired with faculty teaching, doing research on campus. Yeah, I always look at it this way. This guy Boyle, a long time ago, like 5 centuries ago, he was in the laboratory finding out that if he squeezed down on a balloon, the pressure went up. And then somebody said, hey, Bob, you got to teach. And he runs into the lab, and they said, what are you going to teach him? He said, well, I'll teach him Boyle's Law. And he shows him how if you squeeze this down, the pressure goes up. Well, 5 centuries later, we're still teaching it. Because nobody thought, well, why don't we take the new stuff that we're learning in the research laboratory and translate it immediately into the freshman lab? In the freshman chemistry lab, the freshman biology lab. Why is it that when the Hubble telescope generates massive amounts of data and there aren't enough people to look at it, you can't train some freshmen to look at it, and on and on and on. And that's what the Freshman Research Initiative is. Why is this so important? Because right now we admit lots of students to the University of Texas who, when it is time to bubble in the right answer, maybe don't have the foundational background to get B when the answer is B nearly as much as the person with 200 points higher on their SAT sitting next to them. But darn it, they can go into a laboratory and be creative and innovative and hardworking and really show their colors there. Sarah Simmons and I worked on this for a long time with money from Howard Hughes and NSF to show that you put a student from a disadvantaged background into the Freshman Research Initiative and they thrive in terms of their ability to be successful on campus. All of these are examples of how it is that the experiential learning is absolutely the right way to engage our students. And by the way, as increasingly online takes over when it comes to content, this is where the faculty of our universities need to be spending their time. So, as I told you, we spend our time looking one student at a time at the people who come to UT. We've developed techniques. Dan Slesnik in the provost office led these efforts as I was arriving, and he was using them for financial aid awards. I started using them for four-year graduation rate prediction. I now know, as a student arrives on campus, what their likelihood of graduating in 4 years is based on historical data. I know that about every one of them, depending upon college that they go into, depending upon major that they choose. And knowing that, and knowing that I have to get to 70% four-year graduation rates, I have to do something special for the students who are least likely to be successful. If I treat everybody the same in this way, I'm not going to achieve my goals. So what we do is identify the fourth of students who have the least chance of graduating in 4 years historically, and we provide something for them. What is it we provide? About 17 years ago, in my 5th year of teaching freshman chemistry, as I decided to get harder and harder, because my students were getting better and better, at least some of them were. I was giving lots of B's and A's, and I was creating a very nice hump of around 50 students a year that I was failing. And I took a look at it and noticed, I didn't have nice statistical sort of analyses at the time, that there were certain things like the fact that they were first time in college or Pell Grant eligible, and said, I need to do something for these students. Steve Monty in the provost office gave me $50,000, and for $50,000, I brought in 50 students the next year, and I gave them the following. I gave them a small classroom experience. I taught the course. Ephraim Armendariz, the chairman of calculus, taught the calculus course. Ray Neubauer taught the biology course. Notice these students with a 200-point lower average SAT were not remediated. They weren't shunted off somewhere into courses that didn't count for their major. They went into the courses for the college, and they were supplemented to death and mentored to death and advised to death, and community was built around them. And then we looked at what happened. What happened was, and this is absolutely amazing, these students graduated with double the graduation rate of the rest of the college. These are students who are our least likely to be successful. Students with a 200-point lower average SAT than the rest of the college were graduating at 60% four-year graduation rate compared to 30% for the rest of the college. Proof that that whole thing about SAT wasn't the issue. It was more about believing in the students. It was more about providing the support student by student. Monday morning, 8 o'clock, we sat and we called the roster of those 50 kids out loud, and if a kid had strayed, we did what we needed to help them be successful. The number of students in that cohort who went off to medical school, the number of students in that cohort who got into UT Southwestern with an SAT under 1,000 is amazing. So that sort of program, now known as the Texas Interdisciplinary Program Plan, which is expanded to 500 students, is accompanied by other programs on campus. Greg Vincent in the Division for Diversity and Community Engagement runs the Gateway program with about 600 students. There's a foundation program in liberal arts, Discovery Scholars in UGS. They take care of this cohort of students academically to help them to thrive. There is that group of students who are absolutely the least likely to graduate. It's easy to do. You just press the button. You look at the bottom of the spreadsheet. Students with less than a 1 in 3 chance historically of graduating in 4 years. Not surprisingly, if you push the button to look at their economic situation, you find out they're also the students with the greatest need who arrive on campus. What we've traditionally done at UT is have a program in which we identify these students and we gave them money and got them onto campus, and then not much was done afterward, so that the persistence rates were very poor. At the end of the first year, the number of students still eligible to receive their funding was about 60%, just a dreadful number compared to the rest of the university. So we decided to do something different. We created the University Leadership Network. This is an incentive-based program in which the approximately 500 students that we admit using tuition set-aside money are given 5,000 times 4, $20,000 worth of scholarship in addition to Pell and Texas Grant and whatever other sources they get, but they have to behave in ways that are consistent with graduating in 4 years. In that first year, those students are taught leadership training, they do service learning, they write reflections, and every month they either get $500 or $1,000, so there's not some sort of lump sum up front. The only thing we ask of them other than writing those reflections and showing up for leadership and service is that they stay on track to graduate in 4 years. I removed all the restrictions associated with GPA. I find the GPA assignment to scholarship to be stunningly ill-advised. What this does is make students afraid, not fearless. Why should I take a hard class when I should take an easy class? Why should I take 15 hours when I should take 12 hours? So as long as a student stays on track to graduate in 4 years, we give them their money. So these are the numbers at the beginning of the second year. Remember, the averages for the university are 95% overall. These are our students who are least likely to graduate. I need to make sure their distribution stays as close to the rest of the student population as possible. So after 3 semesters, they're at 85% likely of graduating in 4 years, opposed to 88% for the regular student population. One of the ways, and I'm not sure exactly how to do this, but I'll try, that we did this was to create internships in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year. What we need to do more than anything else is to keep these students on campus. These are the kinds of students who typically would go live on Riverside. If you know Riverside, when you live in Austin, most of you probably don't spend time on Riverside, but this is where these students can afford to live. And then I get on a bus and ride through rush hour traffic to get to UT, and they stay on campus as little time as possible, and then head home and work at a local restaurant or convenience store. And that's how they survive. That's how they live at UT Austin. Not surprisingly, their likelihood of graduating in 4 years is 30%. What the University Leadership Network says is no, you should spend as much time on campus as possible. Not time sitting in a dorm room, but time living as part of the community on campus. I was talking to the vice president for the CFO, and she brought up the fact that she had lots of really boring people who worked for her with names that started with A, like auditors and accountants, who loved the university and loved these programs, but wondered how to participate. And it occurred to me, why don't I have my students who want to become accountants be mentored or intern with an accountant in the tower? Why don't I have a student whose father was a fireman spend time with health and safety? Why don't I have a student who wants to grow up to be a scientist spend time in a laboratory? And out of that was developed the campus partnerships. By the time this program is steady state, we will have 1,500 students in internships programs across the university working with those folks. Right now we've got 1,000. We're recruiting our 3rd class of those students, and we're going to be up to, and that's just amazing, 2,000 students are 2,000 least likely, supposedly, to be successful students, now leaders on campus, not just there, but thriving and being a part of it. I like showing this video. I hope it will work, because it'll give you a sense of the way that the rest of campus feels about this.
The University Leadership Network is a 4-year incentive-based graduation program with a leadership focus that's set up to provide students with training in their first year to be leaders in the classroom, the community, and the workplace. And then we prepare them to enter a professional environment in their 2nd year, which is their internship year, which is on campus.
The University Leadership Network program exists to help students who have some type of financial need transition to college, but also to graduate within 4 years.
The ULN program in the first year that they were here really did an amazing job of preparing them for the next step.
Having students that really have an opportunity to have a base foundation in leadership traits and interpersonal skills has been valuable to us, getting them out there to actually do the job.
In that first year, we call that their foundational year. We focused on helping the students transition to college, and then we really start focusing on those leadership skills and those professional skills that they're going to need to go into their internships on campus.
Luke has been a great intern. He helped us launch our first mentor video, and he put together a script, and he did the filming and editing, and we actually launched our mentoring recruitment video with Luke's direction.
I feel like Clarissa has been very independent and very responsible when it comes to her job. She's really great with following through with us when a project is completed, and her communications level is really, I would say, high.
Students who participate in the ULN program have the opportunity to receive a $20,000 scholarship. So our campus partners aren't having to pay students out of their budget, because that's already taken care of through the student's scholarship.
In budgets, we don't really have student worker budgets the way maybe other departments do, but being able to have interns help us is essential to our success.
The opportunity to work with ULN has allowed us to create new positions in the office.
If we didn't have the interns, we would have been restricted to just student workers who really cover the front desk doing clerical work. So it would be hard for them to do the special projects that our ULN interns can do.
You know, this holistic approach that the ULN program does in year 1 really prepares the students to come into the office workplace and be contributing program members from day one.
So you will get prepared students who understand the etiquette of a professional campus office and who want to serve in an office on campus.
Having that extra help in the office and the extra outreach so we can continue to usher in more students and just let everybody know what is available to them, we wouldn't have had that without ULN.
As we look at ways to get students involved and stay on campus, having them doing jobs here I think is really a key point. It's all working towards that 4-year graduation rate. We keep them here, we keep them interested, they're going to be successful.
I value those students at the end of 4 years are going to go off and do great things, and I don't know, knowing that I played a small part mentoring them or interning them or giving them technical skills to do that and be successful is pretty cool.
I should mention that Houston Endowment made a substantial gift to the University Leadership Network, which is going to be hugely beneficial to students from the city of Houston who will be coming to the university. I've shown you so far a collection of the ways that we've gone about the process of attempting to improve the likelihood of students graduating in 4 years. I mentioned earlier, though, a concern about what our faculty do and about the way people are taught in, in this country. I'm going to start off by telling you about my 5-year-old son who went to kindergarten 2 years ago, and soon after he arrived, I was asked to meet with his teacher who wanted me to know that he was in the bottom third of his class, and I should be concerned. He was in the bottom third of his class because he was not parsing sentences. Evidently, that's what you're supposed to do in kindergarten now, as he sits crisscross with the other girls telling nouns from verbs. I'm happy to report that in the 2nd grade, he's caught up. And I think mostly he's caught up because he went home and his parents told him it was going to be okay. I sometimes think about the students all across America who are reminded every day in class that they're not in the top 10%. And maybe they should be satisfied to be average, and why it is that a student would want to come back every day in that environment. I tell my honor students, how would you like to stand out on an athletic field every day for 12 years and have somebody remind you that you're average, but please come back tomorrow? So, this is about my transition as a human being. I realized that I was one of the people responsible for why students weren't graduating in 4 years. I was on a panel in New York, and I was supposed to talk for 5 minutes, and everybody else had already said what I was going to say. So it occurred to me to tell them the truth. I said, I teach 500 student section chemistry courses, and every year for the last 20 years, I have not passed the bottom quartile of my students because that's just how it's done. And so doing the math, I think I've destroyed the lives and hopes and dreams of about 2,000 students, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. We might look at that and say, no, they didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve to pass that course. But then I had to honestly ask myself how hard I was working to help my students pass that course. And I had to admit that I wasn't. I mean, I looked at them, I talked, I gave a test, I generated a distribution. If the students started doing well, I made the test harder the next year. But I always made sure that there were those students to get rid of. As Dr. Faulkner was talking about this, we're supposed to be generating the next generation of engineers and doctors, and here we are shedding them off the front end. I think about higher education this way as well. When I'm trying to get tenure, I still remember trying to get tenure, they gave me like 5 years to do it. And I remember my first 20 or so research proposals were failures. It was a bad first 2 years. And then I caught fire, and I did not get funded from then on in everything I wrote for the next 8 or so. You know what happened in those first 2 years when I didn't get the funding? My chairman took me out to lunch and told me it was going to be okay. That's what happens. No problem. I think about being in graduate school and the very first experiment my students would do and how they would fail, and I'd take them out for a beer and tell them that was okay because that's how it's supposed to happen. Don't worry. It'll work out. You'll get your PhD. And then I think about what we do with our students in STEM classes, giving a high-stakes calculus test 3 weeks after they arrive and having them fail, and then saying, see, you weren't meant to be an engineer or a doctor. That doesn't make any sense to me, and yet that's kind of the world that we've created. And so I figured that if I was going to be the champion of four-year graduation rate, I should be thinking about things differently in my own classroom. So just briefly, I now know, because I have access to this data, who in my class on the first day is going to get the high grade and who's going to fail. I already know this. That's the great thing about predictive analytics. So I can point to that person, you're my A, and that person, you're my F. And then I can just let it play itself out and congratulate myself that I have proved that it's true. Or I can fix it so that you can get an A2. So I have to ask myself how I might do that. Now, I'm fortunate because I teach chemistry that what I'm responsible for is about 200 learning objectives. So I don't have anything that complicated here. 200 learning objectives. They're the same in Uzbekistan, Bolivia, and Austin. And that 200 learning objectives times 1,000 students I have, that's about 200,000 times that I have to have somebody master a learning objective. I can take a student into my office and sit with him or her and say, see this learning objective right here? Let's see if I can help you master that. Let's see if we can do that. And I promise you, I don't care what the learning objective is, and I don't care who the student is, I can have them master it within an hour. Their inability to master it has far less to do with the fact that they can't do it and far more to do with how it is we go about making this possible. A few years ago, and I think this is kind of illegal, I had a young woman who was hearing impaired, and she sat in the front row of my class, and because of ADA, we were spending who knows how many tens of thousands of dollars a year of support for her to take my course. She had 2 signers with her because the class was more than an hour long. They stuck various pieces of electronic equipment onto me so that she could amplify and dictate, and then she failed my first 2 tests. And I called her in my office, and we had a nice lip reading session in which she told me that everything was going to be fine, and I believed her. And then she failed my 3rd exam, and then I brought her back into my office. The final was the next week, and I said, why are you taking my course? And she said, I want to be a nurse. And I said, if you take my final in a week, you will never be a nurse, because that was the reality. Let's find out what's wrong. And what we found out was wrong was this. I found out she couldn't carry. You know how 7 + 9 is 6 carry 1? She'd spent an entire life using electronic devices that allowed her to not learn to carry. And because I had the audacity to no longer allow calculators in my classroom, that's why she couldn't learn the material. So we spent 6 weeks. I taught her arithmetic, algebra, and elementary functions. I gave her homework to take home. She took it home to San Antonio. She brought it back. In the spring, before classes started, we worked through the 3 weeks of material. She did all the work. I just had her come in and show she could do it. And then I gave her a final exam just before the beginning of the spring semester. And she got an A on it, and she got an A for the course. And I hope she's a nurse now. Is that right? Probably. Is that how we do things? No. So, what am I doing in my class? On the first day, I tell them that they're scholars and I expect every one of them to get an A. I tell them to look to the left and the right, in front and back, and that is the community of scholars that will help each other be successful. It's amazing how today's students work with each other. It's not like the 70s where we tried to poison each other's organic lab experiments. Instead, these students genuinely want to help each other be successful. And as I mentioned, I engage technology in a vigorous way. By doing this, do you know what I spend most of my time in class doing? I blow stuff up, and then I teach students how to get A's on tests, and then I facilitate and motivate them running through walls. I do everything I can to make them believe that they can be successful. I make sure that the way I evaluate them isn't going to be demotivating. A student gets a 56 on my first test. If I don't do anything about the way I grade, then they're just going to assume that's the beginning of the C. Why should they bother to try harder? But if I can create mechanisms by which every student is constantly believing that if they keep trying and keep trying and keep trying, that they can get that A, they will. So something as simple as saying that you can take the final for an A and that will be your grade for the course has everybody in the classroom working hard all the way till the end. I think about our competition outside, that's already doing this. Online education. We can think what we want about online education, but the reality is this. I bought my children, because I'm not a good parent here, Xbox last year, and I bought them Halo 4. And my 15-year-old beat it in 2 days, and my 11-year-old beat it in 3 weeks, and my 7-year-old took about a year, but he beat it. The reason he was able to beat it every time, of course, is because those folks want me to buy Halo 5 for Christmas. The lesson there is that it's possible to use adaptive interactive tools online to help people beat zombies and also to teach. And that's what the online community is working very hard to do. If they can make World of Warcraft, they can make a heck of a great chemistry course. And that's the threat we face, unless we do something about it back home, so that what we have to offer is every bit and better in terms of the experience the students have. So here are my grades. I used to get nasty notes from my chemistry chairman, and I would tell them, well, when they start doing all the stuff I'm doing in the other courses, let me know about it. I teach from the same materials. I use the same questions from the data bank. My tests are actually harder historically than others. And yet last spring I had 320 A's. The number of non-passing grades dropped from about 100 down to around 15 or 20, and I'm making progress. And I feel really good about this because I know my students are doing well because they're working really, really hard all the time to be successful. So what do I think faculty should be doing these days rather than harnessing the ability to get a grade in a class by employing the bell curve to get rid of the bottom quartile? They should be being role models, which is what they've been historically. They should be doing the things that they love and leading by example. And I think that in the modern residential campus that we're talking about that's coming, that's in fact what's going to happen as we start to shed some of what we've had to hold on to for a long time. So that's my talk on every student getting an A and every student graduating. Thank you.
How are we doing this? Are you going to go around? Okay, since I don't need to be talking very much, I want to start with the first question, and then we'll take some from the audience. David, you're proposing and have implemented a lot of strategies that represent business not as usual. You must have gotten resistance from faculty members, from administrative officers, and even from students. So could you talk a little about the resistance you've had and how you overcame it?
Yes. You know, the biggest resistance is the faculty who don't want students to graduate in 4 years. I continue to be surprised by that. There really is this sense that a campus should be a place where students can explore. The problem is that lots of students can't afford that. And when you're talking about four-year graduation rates, especially from students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, saying, take your time, build up debt, it makes no sense. And yet that's what's out there. How do I push back against it? Honestly, I guess I feel like it's because it's the right thing, and that what holds most folks back is that change is a difficult thing. There are tricks you can play, like that ability to get the biologists and the chemists and the statisticians to reconsider their courses. They would never have reconsidered their courses if I had said, you need to lower your standards or you need to give higher grades. That would not happen. So there's a place that you can imagine where you create an environment for the students and the faculty to think about things in a more positive and a more uplifting way. And frankly, I really do think that higher education is starting to address these things now. The external world is letting us know that we're being watched, and I think our faculty know this. Our students know that money doesn't grow on trees, and I think they know this. From an institutional level, the day that Bill Powers said 70% four-year graduation rates, I got this pass to walk around telling people to do what I thought was the right thing, and it's been effective that way. But you're right, it's not been easy. I published this 500-word editorial in the Texas Tribune about breaking the bell curve, just your standard breaking the bell curve. And a good friend of mine walked up to me and he looked at me and he said, I read your editorial. And I said, yeah, what'd you think? He said, didn't like it. And I said, why? And this man, who usually is never at a loss for words, just stared at me. He just stared. Because he didn't know why he didn't like it. Maybe it was the fact that, like me, he realized he'd spent a lot of time doing it a way that maybe wasn't the best way. And he was having to come around to a different way of thinking things.
Yes, sir. I'm a retired middle school and math teacher. But anyway, I graduated from college in 5 years, and so did my daughter. Do you have any stats showing among those who graduated in 4 years, 50% in 4 years, what percent graduate in 5 years?
Yes, and this is very much driven by local cultures and the degree plans that students are associated with. I mean, there are reasons why Williams and Haverford are at FourYear. They're $50,000 and $60,000 institutions, and you can get out in 4, so they get out in 4. At UT Austin, you will find that extra half a year, especially in STEM fields, offers some breathing room. It offers some room for a student to fail a course or drop a course and survive. And so the actual 4.5-year graduation rates are at about 65%. So there's a significant climb just with that extra semester. But a lot of that comes down to the streamlining of the way it is that you manage institutionally flow through the degree plans.
Okay, well, take you back here.
Well, there's one over there too. Okay.
Hi, I'm a former student and of yours, and I want to say wonderful talk. One of the things that affected me as a student at UT, and then I see a lot as a lecturer here at Rice and at other institutions, is that one of the reasons why students don't graduate in 4 years is because they change majors. So what are you doing to give better advice at the beginning so that they don't have that moment of truth halfway through their freshman year that, hey, maybe this isn't the right major for me?
This is a really troubling issue because I don't believe really in what I'm doing. What I'm doing is making it possible for a student to choose their favorite major and make darn sure they like that major, and putting them in that major and making sure they're successful to graduate. It doesn't take much to graduate students in 4 years. You make sure they get the major they want, that they're prepared when they start, and that they can get their courses to graduate. I bet at UT that occurred maybe 50% of the time, and that's probably what our 4-year graduation rates were. The problem for me is that is at such odds with the institution I went to, where I didn't choose my major until the end of my second year, a nice 4-year liberal arts college, Sewanee, and I was still able to graduate in 4 years in whatever major I chose. So there is a lot of thought that you should be providing that playground in that freshman year to sort it out for yourself, independent of your parents, so that if you do want to change your major, you can. Well, the only way that's going to happen is if your degree plans are flexible enough to accommodate it. Does that happen in certain places in this country? Absolutely. Does it happen at UT? Absolutely not. And so we're sort of stuck in this mode where we spend all this time with 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds helping them know for darn sure they want to be a pharmacist or an engineer when they have no idea what those things are. I just came from Chavez High School. Wonderful programs they're putting in place. I'm looking at what these students are learning. There's these plasmids they're drawing on the board for kids who are all going to become doctors. And wow, I hadn't even invented plasmids when I went to high school, I think. And so they're so accelerated, and yet they're 15, and they're already down that path. That troubles me a lot.
In this country, far more than half students nationwide change majors.
That's right, and continue to.
Where are we going here?
Yes, I'm not sure you'll know the answer, but decades ago, is it possible that the economics of higher education, with promises of shrinking class size as you moved up toward your graduation, would that have possibly been a factor in either in the indifference or actual deliberate effort to shrink the class sizes as they approach the fourth year?
That certainly varies institution to institution. At UT Austin, there were so many people who wanted to go to UT that if a student dropped out, there were plenty of transfer students to replace them. So this transfer student population at UT is about half the size of, 40 to 50% the size of the freshman population. Now that number is starting to shrink as students start to persist, but that was typically the way they managed things. It did, though, keep the students in the introductory courses. What you're seeing right now on campus is a huge swell in the amount of upper division coursework that needs to be managed.
I think also a factor that needs to be borne in mind is that the old sink or swim system was a derivative of the time when admission to UT Austin was guaranteed by graduation from a Texas high school. And that was true all the way up until about 1980. You could go if you just graduated from high school. So the filtering that had to be done among the quality of the students entering largely had to be done in the freshman year.
Yeah, I think it's enormously important to appreciate the value of what's come because of technology. That ability to sort those students early, to do readiness work with those students early, so that by the time they get to college, they are being effectively placed is important. But it's also the case, I mean, when I went to college, went to high school in the Central Valley in California, only 10% of the students were going to college. The rest of them were going and learning to be an auto mechanic right there on campus. They were learning to be a welder right there on campus. We live in a world today where everybody's supposed to go to college, and that's an interesting change.
That's a different subject.
Yes.
Hi there. My name is Alexandra, and I'm a STEM recipient scholarship, and I'm currently at a very rigorous nursing program right now, and I'm experiencing what you described. I have a 3.9 GPA, but I'm failing leadership, which is just ironic. And I'm wondering what you would recommend I do. I'm in the appeal process right now, but I'm being ignored, and I'm not sure what I can do other than just take it and come back next semester. What can I do?
Without going too much into detail about what you can do, I will point out that it's amazing what appeals can be like if you're aggressive about them. But it's also the case that sometimes you have to accept that the grade you get is the grade you get. My two greatest moments in life were my C in freshman chemistry and failing to get into medical school. They both helped me a lot.
I'm supposed to be calling on people for questions, but the real people who are doing the calling are the ones who are delivering the microphones.
Hi, I'm a graduate student at Baylor and hoping to become a professor. And you'd made a comment that you had removed the restrictions on GPA for the scholarships. Do you worry that it's great to graduate 70% of your school, but what if the product that you're putting out are not hireable? Because so many professions are going to look at those GPAs, and it's great that they graduated with a 2.9, but not if that's going to get them a job.
I guess it's a matter of asking what is more important, and obviously a lot of this is about balance. The students who are going to get 3.8s are going to get 3.8s. I'm more concerned about students who don't take risks. I would prefer that students pursue what it is that is their calling and potentially fail than have them work on a safe GPA. I should point out as well that it may be that folks out there really value GPAs. I don't know. I would hope they value experience more. I would hope that the 3 internships that those students in the ULN do will be far more valuable to them in terms of their careers than a grade they got in a history class.
I guess, are you tracking also the next year, their first year out of college, how many are employed in that field?
That will certainly happen. This is the third, we're ending at ending the third year of the program this year, so it'll be one more year before they cycle out, but we absolutely have to follow that. Remember, these are students who had a 30% chance of graduating in 4 years, and over half of them never graduated from UT. So the mere fact that we're getting them along this way, I think, is enormously important. As to what they do next, our hope is that the experiences that they've had through the leadership training and the internships will help them to be successful in getting employment.
Right here, I'm told.
Okay. Earlier on, you were talking about I think you referred to them as the disadvantaged ones that you pulled aside and taught them extra special things. And I believe you mentioned service in there, service leadership, or was one of them. Would you explain a little bit what that entails?
Sure. I think that it's important for students who come from any background, but certainly from a background in which they've seen poverty, they've seen need, and to know that they're rising up to a level where they're now in a position to be able to give back. They've never necessarily been introduced to the ways in which that can happen, but by providing these sorts of things, it can be something as simple as writing 50 letters to servicemen over the holidays, or volunteering in after-school programs, something that they do from the position of a student at UT Austin. You have to understand that the power of being a student at UT Austin when you go out into the community is something that's simply amazing in terms of what you feel back from the youth. And to know that you're that person when you never thought that was possible is enormously strengthening.
We'll take 2 more questions and then we'll give you a chance to come see David Laude.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Hand. I'm the chair of the physics department, Texas Southern. 2 comments. Texas ranks 30th of all states in terms of the quality of the education level of all its citizens or residents. The other thing is, I graduated from Columbia University, which was a challenge in itself, but one thing I had was ganas, desire. And for me, desire is probably more important than the knowledge you bring in as a student early freshman year. So I applaud your efforts because whether you realize it or not, maybe your students overall are not of the quality of Rice, but those students that come within the 6 or 7% clause or policy in terms of admission, they are motivated students. They may have come from weak high schools relative to others, but within that high school, they were the top performers. So when they go to your school, they more or less have the desire. So I applaud that you has taken the leadership to recognize that fact and to try to create a system that ensures in some sense their graduation. The problem I have is that the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board will now see your success and will try to demand the same success of other Texas schools and not recognize that not all Texas universities are created equal, and they have a student body with different histories and different challenges. So I'm applauding you. I think it's natural that you're pursuing that way, but I hope that as you go around, that somehow you can defend the fact that not all Texas schools have the advantages UT has and obviously Rice has, and that becomes a very important thing.
First of all, I couldn't agree with you more that the job for me is easy because I have students who have demonstrated that desire by being at the top of their class. What I've had to do at UT Austin mostly is to not undermine them when it comes to feeling that they belong, the sense of actually saying, oh, you're not remediating me, you're actually letting me take the regular class, thank you, now I'm going to be able to prove myself, has been a huge hurdle, but once overcome, I'm now able to show off that in fact, it's the kids in the top 10% who overall do better than the rest. So that's been easy. With respect to the issue, and it is certainly a legitimate criticism that there's a difference between a Rice or a UT Austin student, I would offer that Much of what I talk about here is about the ability to create community for the students and that ability to thrive within that community. I've been to a lot of institutions that are struggling to take this on because they have not embraced that co-curricular responsibility with the students in the hope that that will help them to make the student feel that that time spent being a part of the campus is going to help them feel that they can thrive. That's all I can offer specifically about that. I do think there's a lot to be said for building that community and building that right mindset regardless of who the student is.
One more question. Who's got the microphone?
I'm Jackie Gascon from Houston Community College. I'm a mathematics professor and program director, STEM program director. And thank you so much for an outstanding and significant talk. My question is, I'm very interested about the actually the institute that you implemented, leadership network. Would you think that this particular initiative might be effectively implemented into a community college? And if yes, what would be your recommendations?
My way of looking at whether or not a student is going to be successful at school is, well, how many minutes a day they spend at school. Whether they're in a class or they're studying or they're doing something else, because that becomes their home. That becomes what they feel comfortable being a part of. I didn't really spend that much time talking about what it feels like to not belong. But for so many students who feel that higher education is not something they belong to, or that the institution that they're a part of isn't something they're a part of, they belong to simply because they're there to take a class and they leave, or they go online and they leave, doesn't really cement them to the sets of experiences that will allow them to overcome adversity, that will allow them to study harder. The mere fact that we put these 1,500 students in 1,500 offices around campus for 10 hours a week just to have somebody there say, it's going to be okay, you belong here, I think is enormously powerful.
Thank you.
Well, let's thank David Laude. We did not get to, let me invite anyone who would like to talk with him, come forward.
Thank you, Larry.
Okay.